Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's Sunday. That means it's time for the black set review. We're almost at the halfway point. We've got red and green and then gold, artifacts, colorless, and land, which will probably cover 2 videos for those ones. But we're going to jump on into the black set review. I'm not going to go over the disclaimers anymore. If you haven't heard the 3 disclaimers for my set reviews yet, you should go and look at the blue one. You should go and look at the white one. Why would you just look at the black set review? That doesn't make any sense. Go back and listen to those for the disclaimers, but we're going to jump right on into the set review. Up first, we have Bearer of Silence. Bearer of Silence is a 1 and a black creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 2/1. It has Devoid. When you cast Bearer of Silence, you may pay 1 and a colorless, so 1 generic, 1 colorless. If you do, target opponent sacrifices a creature. Also, it has flying, and Bearer of Silence can't block. Don't ignore those. I have a habit, I don't know why, of thinking that anything after reminder text is flavor text. Not flavor text. It does fly and it can't block. So 2 mana for a 2/1 flyer is kind of a common stat that we usually see. Vaporkin is one of the most recent ones that I can remember. Usually they can block, but blocking typically means they'll die. So I'm not really upset in any way, shape, or form that Bearer of Silence can't block. It's a decently aggressive creature, and if you're ever so slightly later in the game, the fact that you can pay 2 and a black and a colorless to make your opponent sacrifice a creature is really, really, really good. This is pretty similar to Fleshbag Marauder, actually. We lose a power, and we have to pay 1 more mana, but we get an asymmetrical effect. It just affects our opponent. We don't have to sacrifice a creature, which I think makes this just a super fine card. Similar to Dimensional Infiltrator, unfortunately, I don't really think this is first pickable, which kind of sucks if you open this as your rare. I think this is more like a 3rd pick, a 4th pick, maybe first pick if you open a pack 2 or pack 3 and you're certainly in black and there's nothing, there's none of the amazing black removal or something that we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, I'm fairly happy with Bearer of Silence, and I think it's a high enough pick to get kind of a B-. It's not going to win a game. It's going to be kind of an early to early mid-game card, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with B- on Bearer of Silence. Next up, we have Dread Defiler. This is 6 and a black for a creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 6/8. It has Devoid, and you can pay 3 and a colorless and exile a creature card from your graveyard, and target opponent loses life equal to the exiled card's power. I am always hesitant about cards that require cards in the graveyard. Outside of Innistrad, where we had a lot of self-mill, you can't always assume there's going to be some. There will be some creatures in your graveyard, probably, but to what extent? 4 mana to do 1 or 2 damage isn't that great, but I think it's an okay enough mana sink. And if you can kind of cross maybe 5 or 6 total damage off this guy from his ability, it gets even better. But I'm definitely worried about the consistency of that. It is a 6/8. But it is also a 7-drop. We didn't play Eldrazi Devastator, and it was an 8/9 for 7 or for 8. Big and dumb is not that good when you're looking at mana cost. The vanilla test does start to fail, and you don't want to play like a 10/10 for 10 or anything like that. All in all, I think this is a little bit too slow and a little bit too inconsistent to be amazing. I think it'll be okay enough if you really need a curve topper in a black deck, but I don't think this is first pickable, and I don't think it's gonna be good enough. I think it's gonna fall kind of like Barrage Titan did. It's a card that seems okay, and you can totally think about a bunch of situations where it would be awesome to have it, but it just doesn't quite get there. I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I don't quite think it gets there. So I'm going to go with a C+. I'd love to see it go up to a B-, but I'm hesitant on Dread Defiler to begin with. Next up, we have Essence Depleter. Essence Depleter is a 2 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It's a 2/3, it has Devoid, and you can pay 1 and a colorless to have target opponent lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. So if you were sad about losing 2 packs worth of Calastria healers, then this might be the card for you. I feel like this keeps the life gain deck viable as it's repeatable so long as you have colorless mana sources. And if you can activate this a couple times a turn, so if you are kind of the heavy colorless black, probably blue deck Obviously, this fits a little bit better in black-white life gain, but I think black-blue, you're probably going to be able to hold the ground and hold the game off a little bit more, that you start to get serious advantage out of this. But if you are in one of those heavy colorless decks, you are playing some waste, you are playing some blighted lands, you're playing some colorless producers, then I think this thing can be really good. If you can do a 2 life drain a turn, I think the game will get out of reach for your opponent very, 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 very fast. I definitely like this card, and I think it's going to kind of be like Calastria Healer, where it's going to be a sign that you should jump in on this if you're getting past these. I've got to go with a B+ on it. I'm really happy about Essence Depleter. I want to see it do really well. Next up, we have Flaying Tendrils. Flaying Tendrils is a 1 black sorcery at uncommon. It has Devoid, and all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Every single set needs a Drown in Sorrow. Last set we had Rising Miasma, and we don't get to scry like we did off Drown in Sorrow, and we don't get an Awaken cost like we did for Rising Miasma, but we do get to fill up the Exile Zone for processing, which is always okay. This is a decent enough card, just as the -2/-2 black spells always are. You need to play them properly. You know, you don't want to play your creatures out if you have this in hand or are planning on getting it. You want your opponent to kind of overextend a little bit and sandbag some creatures so that you can wipe their board and then start playing your own. So make sure that you do play it smartly, but I do think it's a pretty solid card, especially for 1 black. It's a high enough pick, much more playable in a later game control-y deck that wants to kind of, wipe the board around turn 4 or turn 5. So definitely be careful with it. Make sure that you know that you're the deck that wants this, or make sure that if you take this highly, you go into that deck. Don't go into a hyper aggressive deck with this spell in your deck. But I'm a big fan. I like this effect. I like these kind of spells because I do tend to lean towards blue-black sort of control a little bit. So I'm going to go with a B- on it. But yeah, I think it's a pretty high pick. Just be careful about it. Play properly with it. Next up, we have Havoc Sower. Havoc Sower is a 3 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It's a 3/3. It has Devoid. And for 1 and a colorless, Havoc Sower gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So for 2 mana, it gets kind of expensive fire breathing, but also big fire breathing, but also a toughness boost. Like Essence Depleter, I feel like if you can activate this multiple times, it just kind of gets absurd. 4 mana to make this into a 7/5 is huge. And as well, it's totally fine as a 3/3 for 4, which is really nice. A lot of creatures that tend to have this sort of ability are usually pretty weak. Things like Lava Step Raider. You don't want to play a 1/2, even though you can make it potentially bigger. But a 3/3 for 4 is passable. And the fact that it can potentially become a 5/4 or a 7/5, that's just huge. It's not nearly as high a pick as Essence Depleter, which just ends the game without even attacking. But I think this is still a decently playable and decently includable card. Enough for me to go with a relatively optimistic B-. It could only be a C+, but I'm going to go with B- for now. I think it's a decent enough card without being activated, and when activated, it just becomes that much better. So B-. Next up, we have Inverter of Truth. Inverter of Truth is a 2 black creature Eldrazi mythic. It's a 6/6. It has Devoid, and it has Flying. It's a 6/6 flyer for 4, but wait, there's more. When Inverter of Truth enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your library face down, then shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. This thing's cool. It's really cool. It's one of those things that feels like an Eldrazi. It just warps the game and does something with the game that very few other cards have ever done. I don't think you ever really want to do this. I don't think you ever really want to attempt this in Limited. In Constructed, where your graveyard's filling up really fast with fetch lands and spells and instants and removal spells and etc., maybe this is a slightly better card. If you're doing some sort of Laboratory Maniac shenanigans, of course, this card will probably help out somehow. But in Limited, I just don't think you want to roll the dice on this. In Limited, your graveyard's generally going to be, by the time you want to play this card, 5 cards deep, maybe 6 cards, which is going to give you 5 or 6 turns at best to win the game. Now, having a 6/6 flyer should mean that you could end the game pretty fast, but of course, 1 removal spell, 1 bounce spell, 1 anything, and this thing is just dead, and you are looking at a very fast mill-out lose, or loss, rather, would be the proper word. So I'm not a big fan of this, and I really don't like that it's a dead card early on. You know, if this is in your opening hand, you get to turn 4, there's nothing in your graveyard, this is a dead card. You can't play it. You can't play this until way after turn 4. So I'm just not a huge fan of it. I don't think you actually want to try playing this in limited. I'm going to go with I'm going to go with a C- on it because I do want to see somebody play it, but I'm not going to be the one to do that. Realistically, I think it's lower than that, but let's go with a C-. And if you play this, if you give this a go, definitely let me know how it goes. I want to see videos of people playing Inverter of Truth and seeing how it turns out. Next up, we have Kozilek's Shrieker. Kozilek's Shrieker is a 2 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 3/2, it has Devoid. And for a single colorless, Kozilek's Shrieker gets +1/+0 and gains Menace until end of turn. 3/2 for 3 is fine. And for a tiny bit of mana, you can make it a 4/2 Menace. That's pretty nice. And again, multiple activations get better, though not quite as good as the uncommon guys. Of course, multiple instances of Menace don't matter, but the fact that you could make this a 5/2, a 6/2, makes it a little bit better. It still dies if they have, 2 creatures on the board really easily because of that 2 power. So this isn't a high pick, and it doesn't even slightly compare quality-wise to the uncommon cheap activation guys that I just covered. But I think it's an okay enough card. A 3/2 for 3 is fine, and being able to sneak it in if they don't have efficient blockers is decent enough as well. It's not a high pick, but I think it's a little tiny bit above a filler creature, so I'll go with a C+ on it. I don't think I'll feel bad playing this card, but I'm not going to go out of my way to get them or anything. Next up, we have Kozilek's Translator. Kozilek's Translator is a 4 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 3/5, it has Devoid, and you can pay 1 life and add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Activate this ability only once each turn. So Kozilek's Translator cannot cast Kozilek. You need 2 of them. This is okay. It blocks really, really well. I used to pick and play Oracle of Dust sometimes just to be a 3/5 for 5. Even if I couldn't, reliably ingest stuff, I would sometimes play an Oracle of Dust. It's just a really nice ground creature. Sometimes you can get in for damage and it blocks basically everything that's going to be on the ground for, the vast majority of the game, if not the entire game. So I'll probably play this as well as a 3/5 for 5 that blocks. It would be slightly better if it was in blue rather than being in black. And having a source of colorless mana, if I'm really desperate for it, is really nice. It's not a high pick at all. It's really more mid to late pick. I think it's the same place that you would pick up an Oracle of Dust. And it's definitely replaceable if you have something of better quality, but I don't think it's bad, so seems like a solid C to me. Goes up ever so slightly if you do desperately need a colorless source. Next up, we have Oblivion Strike. Prepare yourselves. Oblivion Strike is a 3 and a black sorcery at common. It has Devoid. Exile target creature. Just kill it. Kill it dead. Not even just kill it, but exile it. This is incredible. It would obviously be better if it was instant, but this is the cheapest, most unconditional removal that I have seen in a long time in Magic. And there's actually a fair bit of really good removal in this set. Way more than I've seen in a while, and this is one of the hallmarks of it. And at common at that. Take this super highly. Demon's Grasp is just hot garbage now compared to this. 4 mana to exile anything, as long as it doesn't have hexproof or pro-black, but I don't think anything has pro-black. This deals with Ulamog, this deals with Kozilek, this deals with everything. This is just such solid removal. I think it is totally first pickable in the pack that doesn't have an amazing rare. I think this is the first pick in the vast majority of those packs. This card just seems incredible. I've got to go with a solid A- on it. This is just some of the best removal I've seen in a long time. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to actually kill things. It's going to be awesome. Oblivion Strike A-. Grab these. Grab as many as you can. Next up, we have Reaver Drone. Reaver Drone is a single black mana for a creature Eldrazi drone at uncommon. It's a 2/1. It has Devoid. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life unless you control another colorless creature. I feel like this is just going to get outclassed really fast. 2/1s for 1 are great. I enjoyed Expedition Envoy. It did its job. Unfortunately, it fell off a little bit earlier than it would in most sets because there's an awful lot of easy ways to get 1/1s, Eldrazi Scions, and there's just an awful lot of, stuff that can come down early that just super outclasses a 2/1 for 1. It'll get you in for 2 damage usually, but going any higher than that becomes a little bit more inconsistent. In addition, the fact that if you don't have a colorless creature, you're going to be losing a life every turn kind of hurts. You don't want to get stuck with this not being able to attack and not having a colorless creature and just draining you. So ultimately, I don't think this is that high of a pick. I think it's going to be basically the same as Expedition Envoy, which is just kind of a fine enough creature if you don't have anything that's, terribly better. So I'm going to go with a middle of the road C on this one. I just feel like it's going to get outclassed really, really fast. Next up, we have Sifter of Skulls. Sifter of Skulls is a 3 and a black creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 4/3. It has Devoid. And whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, this seems not too bad. It reminds me of Grim Haruspex, which was whenever a non-creature died, you got to draw a card. And I think drawing a card is way better than getting a Scion. So I don't think this is quite first pickable, which Grim Haruspex I think was. But at least against some premium, uncommons and commons, those will win out against this. But otherwise, I think this is decent enough that you can take it. Second pick, I think it's totally fine once somebody has taken, the most premium card in the pack. It is good though, and if you're in black, I think you'd take it. And a few packs into the pack, I would take it. And I would be super happy seeing this pack 2, super happy seeing it pack 3. It's just a really solid utility creature that is going to generate you a fair bit of value. It's good, but it's not spectacular, but you would never, ever, ever, ever cut it, and I think you're always going to be happy to have it, even if it is a little bit unexciting. So I've got to go with a solid B- for it. Next up, we have Sky Scourer. Sky Scourer is a 1 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 1/2. It has Devoid, it has Flying, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, Sky Scourer, which is going to be obnoxious to say, gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It's no Mist Intruder, that's for sure. Mist Intruder having Ingest was a big thing. This just getting +1/+0 sometimes is not that exciting. Now, if you are in black-blue or sort of black-red or even Grixis colorless, where a lot of your creatures are devoid, and I have had that happen. I played a Grixis deck in Battle for Zendikar where I had a single card that wasn't devoid or colorless. Then it gets a whole lot better because at that point, you are getting in with a 2/2 flyer basically every single turn. But if you're not too big into the colorless, this is just going to be a 1/2 flyer for 2, which is okay, but not all that exciting. You're probably going to cut it for some other things. So I've got to go with kind of like a C-, B-. C- if you're not heavily into Devoid and colorless, B- if you are. It's a fun little split card, I think, that'll be there for people who want it and will be passed for people who don't. Next up, we have Slaughter Drone. Slaughter Drone is a 1 and a black creature Eldrazi drone at common. It's a 2/2. It has Devoid. And you can pay a colorless, and Slaughter Drone gains Death Touch until end of turn. I like this. I like this a fair bit. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is totally fine. We know that. Totally playable. And being able to turn on Death Touch on command makes this pretty darn solid, I think. It reminds me of a slightly bigger version of Mardu Hateblade, which was a 1/1 for 1 that you could pay. It was 1 white that you could cast it for. And for 1 black, you could turn on Death Touch. This is a 2/2, so it's going to be slightly more aggressive. It's going to maybe survive against 1/1s, things like that. It'll be more attackable than Mardu Hateblade was. And yeah, it's going to serve the same purpose, where it'll get in for some damage early. Twice as much damage, which is awesome. And then it'll just sit back, and your opponent's, giant 7/8 can't attack because you have a colorless mana, and it will just kill it dead. I'll be happy to have these, so long as I'm even slightly colorless. Obviously, if you have no colorless sources, then it goes down in value. But I mean, if you're even slightly colorless, I think this is just a great, solid sort of utility pickup. It's not a high pick. You're going to take this, mid-pack, but I would go with a C+ on it. Next up, we have Unnatural Endurance. This is a single black mana for an instant at common, and it has Devoid, and it says target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, regenerate it. We've seen a number of these cards. Generally, they give Death Touch. So there's Necrobite, and there's Touch of Moonglove, and there's another one that I can't think of the name of that we had recently in Dragons, or maybe Cons, and they're always just sort of good. They get the creature that they want to get. Not getting Death Touch means that this does have to go on a sizable enough creature. Your 1/1 is not going to trade with their 8/9 because you cast Unnatural Endurance on it. You're going to need to cast Unnatural Endurance on a 7 power creature, which is a little bit trickier. So it's nowhere near as good as those Death Touch granting ones, but I think it is still fine enough. A lot of your creatures will typically be within 2 power of the attacking creature's toughness, so I don't think it's too bad. And I would be pretty happy to play one of these whenever I have them. I don't think I'd want to stack up on them, and I would definitely replace them for any sort of better removal, like Oblivion Strike or things like that. But I don't think you have to feel sad about including these, so it seems like a solid middle-of-the-road C to me. Next up, we sort of have more removal. We have Visions of Brutality. This is 1 and a black for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It has Devoid. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature can't block, and whenever enchanted creature deals damage, its controller loses that much life. So yeah, it's really interesting. I like it. It's really creative removal. You take your opponent's best creature and say, hey, you can now only attack. But if you do attack me, it's going to deal just as much damage to you. And if I chump block and you deal damage to my chump blocker, that damage gets reflected back to you. It basically makes that creature totally and utterly worthless. Now, obviously, it doesn't work if you're behind in life totals. You know, if I'm at 10 and they're at 18, and they have a 6/6 flyer, and I put this on their 6/6 flyer, they're going to pretty happily hit me twice, because I will die before they will. But this is a cheap enough investment that I think there's going to be just so many situations where this is just going to be solid removal. You're going to be at similar life totals or matching life totals. You're going to put this on a ground creature, and you're going to have ground creatures that could chump block it, and very rapidly your opponent would take too much damage. I think this is just really solid removal. I don't think it's quite on par with Oblivion Strike. I don't think it's quite on par with some of the other removal. But it's still really good. I've got to go with a solid B on it. Maybe a B- because it doesn't handle kind of those big flyers, but there's so few of those that, no, I'm pretty confident with a solid B on this. I'm going to take this pretty highly, and I'm going to love throwing this on my opponent's creatures. Next up is Witness the End. Witness the End is 3 and a black for a sorcery at common. It has Devoid, and target opponent exiles 2 cards from his or her hand and loses 2 life. So this is the Mind Rot variation for the set. Every set has a Mind Rot variation, which is 2 and a black, discard 2 cards. Extra mana, the opponent loses 2 life. I guess losing 2 life is worth the extra mana, I suppose. It's kind of like a shock was tacked on. It's way more playable in sealed, as Mind Rot always is, and it's far less playable in draft, as Mind Rot always is. If you have a spot for it, go ahead. If you need a 23rd card, go ahead. But it's preferable to play something else instead of this. So that's kind of a definition of a C- to me. So Witness the End, C-. So black has way more Devoid cards than it does non-Devoid cards, but we're now into the actual black non-colorless cards. And we've got Corpse Churn. Corpse Churn is 1 and a black for an instant at common. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I don't care for these cards. I don't care for these cards when I'm not milling myself, and self-milling isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things. It's a hard thing to understand why self-milling is actually totally okay, but I don't want to tack that on to a card that I wouldn't play anyways. So no thanks. This is a total ass pick to me. It's way too slow. Graveyard to hand is just way too slow. Way too slow. So no, I'm totally out on this card. It's a straight up F for me. I don't ever want to play Corpse Churn. Next up, we have Drana's Chosen. Drana's Chosen is a 3 and a black creature vampire shaman ally at rare. It's a 2/2, and it has Cohort. Tap an untapped ally you control. Put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield tapped. Yeah, I like this quite a bit. I think, assuming the ally deck is supported in Oath drafts as much as it was in Battle, and it certainly seems to be. Remember, there is only 1 pack of Battle going around this time, so you're not going to get a ton of rally triggers for the ally deck, but we'll see how that shapes up. But being able to drop a zombie at the end of each opponent's turn will quickly lead to a board flood. I feel like this is totally first pickable, at least early on while the format shapes up and we find out if Cohort is something that's going to be activatable quite a bit. I could see it falling off if the ally deck isn't as strong as it was in Battle, but I'm going to start pretty high on this just because getting, 2/2s every turn is going to be awesome. If you are even the tiniest bit ahead or in a board stall, this thing is just gonna take you so far ahead. So I'm pretty happy with Drana's Chosen. I'm gonna take it pretty highly. I've got to go with an A- on it. Next up, we have Grasp of Darkness. Grasp of Darkness continues the good removal suite. For black and a black, you get an instant at uncommon that says target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. Yeah, between this and Oblivion Strike, Demon's Grasp just seems like a terrible, terrible, terrible removal card now. Yeah, -4/-4 at instant speed for 2 mana is awesome. Now, obviously, you can't splash this because it is black-black. And if you are really low on the black, you just can't reliably put this in your deck. But, I mean, if you are even, slightly, solidly black, like if you are an even split, or of course if you're, majority black, then this is just a fantastic card. Great removal. The removal in this set is just so exciting me. -4/-4 should kill an awful lot of things in the format, so I'm pretty happy to have these. I would be pretty happy to have multiples of these, so I've got to go with a solid B on it. Next up, we have Kalatas, Traitor of Get. This is a 2 black legendary creature vampire warrior at Mythic. It's a 3/4. It has lifelink, and I'm sold right there. But there's a ton more. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, instead exile that card and put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Not tapped. Most 2/2 zombies come in tapped. These ones don't. In addition, you can pay 2 and a black to sacrifice another vampire or zombie and put 2 +1/+1 counters on Kalatas, Traitor of Get. This card seems insane. 3/4 lifelink for 4. Totally sold right there. Totally always going to take it, always going to play it. Being able to get a 2/2 zombie every single time one of my opponent's creatures dies, that is super awesome. Being able to duct tape that 2/2 zombie onto Kalatas, even better. This thing will get out of control so fast, putting your life total so far out of reach of your opponent that I think you just have to slam first pick this every single time you see it, and I think you are going to be super, super, super happy with it. Kalatas, Traitor of Get, A+. So excited to play with this card. Next up, we have Malakir Soothsayer. Malakir Soothsayer is a 4 and a black creature vampire shaman ally at uncommon. It's a 4/4. It has cohort, tap an untapped ally you control. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. So this is kind of another pretty decent reason to go into the Cohort Allies deck. It's certainly not the worst ability, and paying 1 life for 1 card is a very common and very reasonable trade the vast majority of the time. Not only that, but a 4/4 body is solid enough that you're probably willing to keep this back if you're in sort of a board stall state as a solid blocker, which means it's going to be tapped along with, or tappable along with another on-tapped ally on your opponent's turn to get that extra card draw. I think it's totally playable, totally a fine include, and a decently high pick. It's no drawn as chosen, but I think it's really, really solid, so I've got to go with a B- for Malakir Soothsayer. Next up, we have Null Color. Null Color is a 3 and a black creature vampire shaman at uncommon. It's 2/4. For 3 and a black and exiling a creature card from your graveyard, you get to put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield, tapped. So unlike Kalatas, these ones are tapped. So 3 and a black for a 2/2 zombie, and you have to exile one of the creature cards in your library. I'm pretty okay with this. Again, it's another example of 2/4 for 4, which is totally fine. There's so many of these in this set that I think there might be a number of board stalls, because 2/4s block really, really, really well. So be on the lookout for that. But it's a great blocker. You can get in for damage if needed, and being able to pay the same cost that you paid to cast it, you can return your dead creatures into more chump blockers or potentially attackers or sackable targets or whatever. It seems like a totally fine include. It's not a super high pick, I don't think, but I'm pretty happy with a C+ on it, and I'll probably play it almost all the time that I have it. Null Color, C+. Next up, we have Remorseless Punishment. This is a 3 black sorcery at rare. Target opponent loses 5 life unless that player discards 2 cards or sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Repeat this process once. I love the phrase repeat this process once. I don't know if I've ever seen it before. So this is 5 damage unless your opponent can fulfill a Mind Rot or an Edict twice. I'd be really happy with this doing 10 damage for 5 mana. I'd be really happy with a double Edict for 5 mana. I'd be decently happy with a Mind Rot and an Edict for 5 mana. and I'd be decently happy with 5 damage and an Edict or 5 damage and a Mind Rot. So I'm actually pretty happy with almost all of the cases of this. The only time I wouldn't be excited about this is if it was a double Mind Rot. 5 mana, discard 4. I mean, even that's okay, but it's not as exciting as the other ones. But turn 5 and after, you're hopefully not facing an opponent who has 4 or more cards in their hand. So this thing will probably be 5 damage and something, or a double Edict. I'm pretty happy with this, and I'll likely first pick it to begin with. I could potentially see it just not fleshing out and just not quite being as good as it could be, because it is, of course, giving your opponent all of the choice. But I'm excited to see how it goes, and I'm going to start a little bit high on this, and I'm going to consider it pretty first pickable. So I'm going to go with a B+ on Remorseless Punishment. But I am prepared to see it go down. Next up, we have Tar Snare. Tar Snare is 2 and a black for an instant at common. Target creature gets -3/-2 until end of turn. Unfortunately, we've already covered Grasp of Darkness and Oblivion Strike, so this actually seems worse compared to those, but it's still decent enough removal for a 3-mana spell. It falls off a little bit in the late game, of course. It only kills kind of a small subset of creatures outside of combat, but it does kill them post-combat as well, and thankfully it is instant speed. It could even potentially save one of your creatures while killing theirs. So I think it is still totally fine. It's a little bit more of a combat trick removal spell than it is a straight-up removal spell, but that's still totally fine. So I think it is a lower pick than Oblivion Strike, obviously, and a lower pick than Grasp of Darkness, but I think you still take it relatively highly, and I think you're still pretty happy playing it. So I've got to go with a C+ on Tar Snare. I'll play it much more often than I cut it, I think. Next up, we have Untamed Hunger. Untamed Hunger is a 2 and a black enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has Menace. This one's a little bit better. An aura that pumps and gives evasion is something that you do have to consider, more so than most auras. +2/+2 in Vigilance doesn't really give a card evasion at all. Flying is a bit better, but Menace is totally serviceable. I still think it's a little bit weak. In a really aggressive deck, it could do some real early damage and really put the race out of reach of your opponent. But in any deck other than kind of those hyper-aggressive, I don't think you want to take it. It is a super low pick. This is late pack pick. But if you have kind of the right deck, I think you would be pretty happy to play this card. But just make sure that you are in that right deck. I think it's totally not includable in most other decks. So I've got to go with a C- on it. Next up, we have Vampire Envoy. Vampire Envoy is a 2 and a black creature vampire cleric ally at common. It's a 1/4 flyer, and whenever Vampire Envoy becomes tapped, you gain 1 life. I'm not actually sure how to rate this one. 1/4 flyer, that's kind of those odd stats where it's like I want to attack with this creature because of its ability and because it's a flyer, but those stats are really, really defensive. Now, as we learned with Benthic Infiltrator, it's still a fair bit of damage, and if the ability is relevant, then you may as well. It combos really well with Cohort, of course, because you can tap it for Cohort. It is an ally. And then not only will you get the Cohort ability, but you'll also gain a life off of it, which is a nice little bonus in the Cohort ability. Plus, that means that you can keep this back as a blocker, and a 1/4 flyer functions as a very, very, very nice blocker. I think I really do need to play with this to figure out exactly what the grade's going to be on it. I'm going to start with a C, because it's kind of the easiest grade to give. It's middle of the road. That means that it's totally playable. You can cut it if you want. You can keep it if you want. I could see it going up to a C+ in the right deck, but I'll keep an eye on this, and it's one that I definitely want to give a try to see how it plays in the format, but we're going to go with C for now. And that brings us to the last card in black, Zulaport Chain Mage. Zulaport Chain Mage is a 3 and a black creature, human, shaman, ally at common. It's a 4/2. It has Cohort. Tap, an untapped ally you control. Target opponent loses 2 life. This, of course, is a nice mirror to Ondu War Cleric, where you gain 2 life for cohorting. I like this much more than the Cleric, because life loss excites me way more than life gain does. Again, I feel like Cohort asks a lot in tapping 2 entire creatures, so it's going to remain to see if that is something that isn't that much of a cost, and I hope it's not. I have a feeling it's going to work pretty darn well. If you can afford it, though, this should be really great inevitability, and it's going to require your opponent to use removal on, some piddly little creatures. Now, this is a 4/2. It can attack for some pretty serious damage if your opponent, is stumbling and doesn't have creatures, but I think that sort of 2 life loss a turn is going to be pretty darn decent. And of course, it's going to set up those final turns where you get to do 2 on their turn and then immediately 2 on your turn, which will feel like a really nice way to finish the game. So I'm going to start relatively high in this creature. I'm going to go with a solid B on it. I think it's going to be kind of the Calastria healer of the cohort deck. It's going to be the card that really makes that deck shine. But yeah, I'm really excited to give it a go and see how it plays out. So Zulaport Chainmage, B. So that's going to wrap it up for Black. Black looks fun. Good, cheap removal seems to be back. Oblivion Strike, so excited. Grasp of Darkness, really excited. I can't wait to fool around with Visions of Brutality. There's some awesome mythics in here. Kalatas, Trader of Get seems awesome. I'm really excited to play Black. I'm really excited to play Blue-Black, as I always am, but boy, does it look fun in this set. Definitely let me know what you agree with and what you don't agree with in this set review. What card are you excited to play with in Black? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leak. You've already found me here on YouTube. You've got the comment section down below. As I said, please make use of that and please keep it civil. And if you like my videos, there's the little thumbs up icon. I love seeing thumbs up. If you like the videos, click it. And then you should also subscribe. There's the subscribe button below each video. There's one in the outro of each video. Clicking those will let you know the second the additional set review videos come up, as well as my regularly scheduled programming next week with Crack-a-Pack Tuesday, Wacky Wednesday, Top 10 Thursdays, Spiky Saturdays, and of course with set release there will be various special episodes, box openings, things like that. So definitely make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on those. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all next time.